Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cherise Kimbrough, and I lead the Allstate Foundation's work to reduce the prevalence of relationship abuse and disrupt the cycle of relationship abuse. I'm so excited that you all have joined us today to talk about a really important topic, but it's also one that's not largely recognized, and that's economic abuse among teens. Joining me today, I have Kumani Bay, who is a student at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I have Liz Ding, who is a student at the University of California, San Diego, and Sarah Gonzalez, who is the Associate Director of Workplace and Economic Justice at Futures Without Violence. The Allstate Foundation has been investing in the work to eradicate domestic violence for nearly 20 years, and we've invested over $90 million in this effort. We do this by supporting organizations that provide direct support to survivors. We also provide asset building resources for survivors. And we also work with partners like Futures Without Violence to help prevent violence before it even starts. You know, when I first met Sarah and was introduced to this concept of teen economic abuse, my response as a mom of two young men who were not teenagers long ago was, how can that be possible? Teenagers don't have any money. Then I quickly learned from Sarah that it's not just about finances, and that the way teen economic abuse shows up in teen dating relationships is really quite different. So Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about economic abuse in teenagers, why the study you did was necessary, and what were some of your findings?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that you're all here to learn about this as well, because as Cherise mentioned, when I started talking about this concept, I was really confusing people. They kept on saying, this can't possibly be happening. Young people don't have money. How could this possibly impact their lives? And I think one thing that was really important in my research around economic abuse is it's about cutting off economic opportunity. So it's much, much more than just finances. And recognizing that young people's future lives and careers are solidified in many ways in their young experiences, right? How successful they are in school, early employment opportunities, the money they may be able to start saving as they are about to embark on being independent adults. And that's all our goal, right? We want them to be able to leave when they're 18, go off and succeed. But if they start to experience some of these forms of economic abuse, what could happen is opportunities and pathways may start disappearing. So we wanted to really think about how we can get ahead of this problem and address it before it becomes something that impacts their lives. And we knew this was something that had to be happening because when we were working with survivors of domestic violence in particular, in shelter programs and transitional housing programs, they were showing up at 18. So this wasn't out of the blue. This was something that they had been experiencing for a while, but not something that was recognized. And thankfully, the Allstate Foundation really was curious, like I was, to really explore how this may look different among young adolescents versus adults. And they graciously funded a study that we led in 2021. It was co-designed with teens. And it really was the first opportunity that we know of that really explored economic abuse among adolescent relationships. We asked a whole bunch of different questions to get a sense of prevalence, the use of abusive behaviors, attitudes and norms, and importantly, what younger people need to be able to support themselves in these healthy relationships. As I've already admitted, I'm a data person, and I like to be able to get a sense of where people are. So, as I mentioned, I think a lot of the challenges we faced is a lack of understanding of what economic abuse is broadly. So as you see, I'm using Mentimeter. I encourage you to all either scan the QR code or use the code 8551-5834 to participate in the conversation today. So as you're going ahead and answering the question about how you would define economic abuse, we've seen a number of studies that focus on this among adult relationships, that it is something that we've actually done some metrics on. There's some specific indicators that we look for, and some of them do make sense when looking at teens. Regardless of what individuals think, teens actually do have money. I was working from 13 on, so I know I had money in my pocket. And also thinking about the other economic opportunities young people have, their ability to succeed in school, and their early employment opportunities. So as I see some of you adding in some of your responses to what economic abuse is, it is absolutely using money to control someone. That control piece is important. Removing independence, yes, absolutely. And often we find that this is intentional behavior that people are using to cut off those opportunities, knowing that they will further entrench their dependency on the partner in the relationship. So I'm seeing a lot about money, controlling finances, inability to access resources meant, and the QR code's covering that, so I can't finish that right now. But you're all in the general direction of what we're looking at. And the way I often conceive of economic abuse, it falls into 3 general buckets. We have education interference or sabotage, employment sabotage, and then financial control and exploitation. So it's a little bit larger than what we often conceive of as just financial abuse and purely cutting off people's access to financial resources. So for here, you're all educators involved in creating the future of our country, and I wanted to focus specifically on education interference and what it could look like. These are just a few examples that we see, and as you're looking at some of them, they may not seem like a devastating thing, right? Spending less time studying, or skipping one class, which is terrible to do, but it's often out of the desire to spend more time with your partner, right? Our young people today are so incredibly busy, they often don't have a chance to spend time together, so that might be the way they do it, by doing the same activities, participating in the same classes. But when this becomes problematic is when it's coercive and when it's controlling. So when we did our survey to better understand this, we recognized that, I could have easily said, yeah, I probably spent less time studying some time to take that phone call, right? I'm sure we've all done some of this in some level or another. But the fact we focused on was whether an individual felt threatened, bullied, or coerced by their partner to do one of these activities. So it really rises to the level of this is a threatening relationship that is designed to control another. So among all of these things, a lot of it can build up after time. You can see how changing your classes might change your future career pathway. It might impact your studies, your grades may drop, so your college choices may be limited. We know that those extracurricular activities are really important to exploring new areas that may not be available in school, and also to build those well-rounded kind of aspects higher education is looking for. So there's a lot of interference that you may start to see with an individual whose behavior is changing, that they are not putting as much effort into classroom, or their grades are dropping, or you just sense something is off. And that's where some of this economic interference might be taking place. Now, of the study, the findings were quite alarming. I had expected them to be high. I didn't expect them to be as high as they ultimately ended up being. Of the nearly 3,000 young people across the United States between age 13 and 19, 68% reported that they experienced at least one form of educational interference, similar to the examples I just gave on the previous slide. Now, many of the young people who indicated this did say that they were in a history of dating violence in their relationships. So it doesn't surprise us all that much that they would have also experienced economic abuse. What was a bit more concerning was that many of the young people, a quarter of them who said they hadn't been in an abusive relationship, reported that they experienced one of these forms, which gets to another key finding that we had is many young people don't recognize this as abusive behavior. Make sure I'm going with my slides at the right point. So if we as adults have failed to recognize it for however long we've been in this movement, how can we expect young people to be able to recognize this form of abusive behavior? So in considering some of the examples I gave, think back to the students you've been working with over the time who are on your campuses, in your classrooms, in the halls. Could you see that maybe there are some forms of economic abuse that could have shaped their experiences in school, whether their class participation's dropping, truancy issues, being late, complete disengagement? I'm already seeing those of you who are participating 100% are saying yes. It's something that once you're aware of it, you start to see it a little more clearly. And we want to make sure that young people are able to succeed in their education, and this becomes a threat that could be underlying a lot of these behaviors. It's not necessarily a perfect cause and effect situation, but it's absolutely something to consider, just as you would consider experiences of violence and trauma in the community. So as I mentioned, young people did not recognize this as domestic violence or dating violence. We specifically asked them to compare the definitions that we know and use in the field under those three different areas: education interference, employment interference, and financial control. And what was very concerning, again, is that only 44% at the best identified these behaviors as abusive conduct from a partner. So it really gave us pause to recognize that we have missed the mark on how we're educating young people about relationship abuse. And because this has such an incredible ripple effect throughout someone's lifetime, we recognize that it's incredibly urgent for us to start raising awareness and stop these relationships from becoming entrapments before they start, so they can actually enter their adult lives without having obstacles created by gaps in education, a lack of work history, or no finances to even pursue education or other opportunities. And before I turn it back over to Charisse, the last thing I'll say, and why you're all here, is we're really excited because you are all the key audience who can reach them. You have them in your classrooms, you see them on campus, and it's a really incredible opportunity to help raise awareness and prevent economic abuse before it starts.
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. I know seeing those statistics for the first time can be a little alarming and disconcerting. So I just wanted to check in with you, Kumani. Do these findings resonate with you? Are they consistent with what you see among your peer group?
Definitely. It's concerning because it starts in middle school, honestly. In middle school, there are tons of teens who are getting into their first relationships, and in these relationships, they're already making decisions that are impacting their future because they're prioritizing that relationship over their own future. And specifically with me, my senior year of high school, I got into my first relationship, and when everybody was figuring out what college am I going to, what am I going to do after high school, all of my plans were based off of her. Where is she going to go? What is she going to do? Does she even want to go to college? And I was so scared that if I didn't move with her and we didn't make decisions based on our relationship, then we would fall apart. And I started prioritizing that relationship over my own success and my own future. And there's two sides of it. Some people don't even know what they want to do, and so they latch on to these relationships to figure out where they're going to go. But me, I already had a plan. I had my plan since like junior year, but all of a sudden, this relationship mattered more, and it was really concerning to a lot of people around me, my parents, and they were just wondering, why are you putting her over the happiness you already know you're going to get from your own future? And that's to say, the lack of economic awareness, but also security within people's lives and families, they start relying on friends and their partners to kind of find some kind of security, and they find that bond with them because they don't know what they're doing already. And this can lead to very harmful behaviors, and this can lead to teens getting taken advantage of because they already don't know what they're doing. And because economic abuse is not talked about or even taught about, we don't even know the signs when we're experiencing it. But we also don't even know the signs when we could be the ones portraying them in our own relationships. We can think that we're just being passionate, supportive partners, and we find out that we're taking somebody's life away because we think that our relationship matters than their own individuality. And it's really scary.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kamani, and thanks for your vulnerability and sharing your experience and your story. And I think that's a perfect example of why this research is not just research. The numbers are not just numbers. There's lives and experiences behind each number. on the screen. And I think when Sarah and I first met and were talking about the results of the research, my question to her was, well, what do you want to do now? Like, what's the next thing? And she said, well, I would love for this not to just sit on a shelf, but to live in the world. And so the next step was that Futures activated a fellowship program where they engaged two cohorts of young folks, one cohort in Charlotte, where Kamani was, and another cohort in the Bay Area, where Liz was. And they really created a youth-centered, youth-led social media awareness and education campaign. The website launches today. Yes. It was a big deal. So to both you, Kamani and Liz, maybe Liz, if you wanted to start, what was your experience participating in the fellowship? What was that like for you?
I can start. So I was not a big fan of teamwork growing up. I was someone who loved to control the group, but I found it was because in school you're forced to work in groups, and because of that, you get so many people who do not care about the project. And so me, being the one who cares, I took over and I was like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, this is how we're gonna do it, and you guys are gonna listen to me. And of course they followed because they didn't want to do it. But in this specific fellowship, I was working with so many other teens and young adults who loved what we were doing, and they cared so much about the project that it helped me find a way to work with them. And I love that because it takes so much off of my shoulders, and I get support, but I also get to support others. And I met so many great people who I know I'm going to have lasting relationships with in the future. But then I also found my passion in women's gender and sexuality studies, which became my major in school. So that was great.
It's awesome.
Yeah, personally, I also had a great experience. I came into the fellowship not really totally understanding what teen economic abuse was about. And through collaborating with such a diverse group of people, I was able to gain so many invaluable insights and really be able to participate in something that really affects so many students across the nation. And a little fun fact about my cohort, the Bay Area, we are the first cohort representing the West Coast. So yay.
So I want to go back a little bit to the research, Sarah, and something that Kamani mentioned and Liz, that a lot of folks don't know about it, right? I didn't know about it. I think none of us knew about it. So given the prevalence and impact of teen economic abuse, why do you feel like it hasn't been talked about before?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. First and foremost, and if any of you are working in the domestic violence, sexual assault field, I think even the way we define economic abuse can be challenging. You often hear two different terms, financial abuse and then economic abuse. And that can sometimes create some kind of misconceptions or just like really focus people in on the financial aspects specifically, when we know that is just a part of this larger kind of issue of economic abuse. So I think that's one piece. And as you know, in our first conversation, the thought that young people don't have money was something that was pretty prevalent as well. And this came up when I was doing interviews with practitioners in the field working with young people. I wanted to get their sense before I started talking to teens on how might this be showing up? And I got the same response: this can't be happening in their relationships. Until I started to give examples in which they responded, well, yeah, that happens all the time. So I think it's just a lack of understanding of how we even define these concepts. Maybe a lack of understanding of what teens are actually doing, and maybe not seeing them as young adults who are going to be becoming independent in their lifetimes. So I think a lot of underplaying that has been a problem. But also, I don't want to be thinking about young people experiencing this kind of form of abuse, right? You think about it as something that you're experiencing as an adult to cut off opportunity that someone may have. And this may not be intentional behavior by a partner to limit their opportunity, but as Kumani said, you don't necessarily have a good understanding of the ripple effects some of these decisions may have. And for many young people who could be experiencing economic abuse, it could really change their future plans. And that's where our hope is to, even as people who aren't directly experiencing it, let's think about how we are making sure we're a supportive partner that will prioritize their own independence and their success as part of the relationship goals.
Yeah, that's so important on both ends of sharing out to learn to teach others, but also incorporating that into our own lives. So, to Kamani and Liz, what are you all learning as you're doing this campaign? What have you learned? Is there any message or messages that really kind of are connecting particularly with you and or your peer group?
Yeah, specifically with the campaign, because it was such a big project, I learned how important it is to work on every single meticulous little detail and how these little steps really, really matter, because simply learning about what was going on changed the entire course of the project. Because if they had come to us assuming that we already knew what was going on or we already knew what we were talking about, even with the training that we went through every single part of what economic abuse is. We learned the different types of economic abuse. We learned about other types of abuse because we learned how they all intertwine with each other. We learned about gender. We learned about sex. We learned about everything that can go into this, because we had to work on every little step to be able to even teach other people what we're doing.
Yeah, personally, I learned how important student voices are, especially in the decision-making model, and also how it affects the campaign, and also how we can make the student-centered.
Another thing I learned is related to what I just said. A problem can't be solved if no one's aware about it. And I feel like, especially in the training and when we started talking to other people about economic abuse, so many people were ready to jump to solve everything and be like, how can we get this gone? But people don't even know it exists yet. So I think it was really important to learn that a problem cannot be solved if nobody is aware of it and nobody's even acknowledging that it is a problem.
Yeah, and students really need support, especially through their educators, through people in their lives. And I believe that it really helps foster a sense of belonging, seeing that they have a community that they can relate to, and it's just really empowering.
Yes, and that is why I say that teens, and not just teens, but everybody needs to learn the difference between control and support, because teens are growing up being controlled by all types of authorities, and they're dictating their futures instead of being provided with supportive systems and supportive figures who are saying, this is how I made my life, and these are the steps you can take to make your life yours, instead of this is what your life should look like.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kamani. And I know earlier we talked about that control and support dynamic extends to parents as well, and not just relationships that we have with one another. And as a parent, that's sometimes a very difficult thing to balance. So that's important, so thank you for that. And Liz, you mentioned that it's important that teens need support, they need a sense of belonging and community. What do they need from adults, particularly educators, to help prevent teen economic abuse?
Yeah, so educators play a pivotal role in creating a safe space for their students. And I believe that amongst that, integrating financial literacy into the curriculum through health or PE classes is very imperative in uplifting student voices and allowing them to gain the necessary skills to understand the implications of teen economic abuse. And I feel like by providing training for these educators, they will really understand teen economic abuse and ways to support their students.
Thank you for that. And then, Sarah, are there tools and resources available for educators and parents and students to help, well, really for educators and parents to help the young people in their lives and to have the kind of conversations that both Kamani and Liz have been talking about?
Yeah, well, I'm so excited you're here because you're interested and you care. And there is a lot that adults can do, and I draw some of this back from the stories I heard from young people in the focus groups that we had before designing the actual survey itself. And they really do look to educators to provide that support to them. They spend a lot of time in school, and their lives are really intertwined. And just a couple of initial stories before I give some specifics. I remember a couple of young people who were saying that their experiences in their early relationships were often dismissed by the adults in their lives, that this is just your first relationship, right? It's not a big deal. This is not going to be for your forever person. You don't know what real love is yet, right? Those kind of responses that are really belittling these experiences that young people are having. And I remember being a teenager, everything is very new, right? These relationships are new to them. These feelings are new. And it can be very, very overwhelming on top of everything else going on in your life. You're trying to navigate a new relationship. You may or may not have healthy relationship models in your life to even know what to do. It is a lot. And we want to make sure that first and foremost that we're really acknowledging and seeing how they're feeling as really valid and recognizing that. So that was an important starting point that a lot of young people mentioned to me. I think as educators, knowing that you already have more than enough on your plate, I really see this as an opportunity to help you identify potential obstacles to their success and look at it through that lens. We don't need you to be doing more things. We don't want you to be counselors. But what can help is if you're aware of some of these signs, that could help the light bulb go off in your head. Like, maybe that's what's behind this behavior. This has been a student that's always been very consistent in how they respond, and I'm starting to see them withdraw. And it might not even be specifically economic abuse. It could just be the impacts of dating violence in general on their education. So having that awareness means that you're able to hopefully try to have a conversation with them, try to direct them to supports. I know that there can be some challenges with this, with mandatory reporting in different states and localities, but just even having the conversation, the materials around, young people may start to see themselves in that experience and may be able to reach out for help. I often, we have on the little fact sheet that was shared around, I think about some of those first conversations can be really hard to have with someone when you suspect something is just not quite the way it used to be. And it really is, when people are experiencing violence, I think you're so isolated and you feel marginalized that even just acknowledging and saying, hey, something doesn't seem right with you. I'm concerned about you. Is that, I'm here if anything's going on. You don't need to come out and say, I think you might be experiencing dating violence or economic abuse, right? But just really being that warm person who can offer some support to them. And you know what resources are available in your own school districts and in your communities, and letting them know about them. If there are great clubs, like I know a lot of our young people in the San Francisco Fellowship, they have a lot of clubs that actually focus on teen dating violence and awareness. Those are other opportunities to really think about ways we can incorporate this into just the overall fabric of the school. So this, and I'm going to bounce to one other issue that can really shape your responses from school to school. And this really came up when I first went to North Carolina to meet with the young people there. And there were such different landscapes of what supports and education was available to young people in North Carolina versus young people in California. They never had sex education. When we brought that in, you all requested them to come back because it was something that there were so many questions about. And truly the limited exposure to healthy relationships, the resources, financial education, all of that preparation was very much absent in your experiences in school. And that was truly heartbreaking. And then became even more heartbreaking when we reflected on the folks in San Francisco who had access to those clubs that are focusing on dating violence and healthy relationships. You're more likely to have sex education. It may not be perfect, but there are more of those structural pieces. So I'm very aware that where you are teaching can really shape those experiences for young people. But it's also incredibly disturbing to see that depending on what state you're in, you may have better protective factors than other states. And that truly broke my heart, and is a call for us to go talk to policymakers, and really we can show examples right now of how those differences may impact young people. And we could probably do an analysis by state based on what kind of supports that are available to see if there were differences in rates of economic abuse among young people. So I say all this to really encourage you to think about what creative solutions you may have. In your health programs, is there a way to talk about healthy relationships, thinking about how to talk about conflict in relationships, your own identity versus the identity of you as a couple, right? And helping young people kind of navigate that. Exposing them to what financial literacy could be. I am of the generation that still had home economics in school. I know that's long gone. But some of those really practical tools to be able to become adult are just no longer part of those educational opportunities. And really trying to think about, again, creative solutions to the problem. We all know none of us have the capacity to do more. It's more of thinking about where are those intersections? Where might clubs be able to have some of these conversations? I mean, even just Girl Scouts pop into my head right now, right? They do a lot around young women's entrepreneurship, so perhaps that's yet another opportunity to think about. Let's talk about, how you're managing your money in relationships. Let's talk about what financial sabotage can look like. So there's a lot of different approaches to that. And I think, some of the other pieces that I did specifically want to raise and isn't the focus of education sabotage, but was really pretty upsetting for me to see in the data. Young people who are economically vulnerable, who don't have a lot of stability, were actually entering into relationships for financial need. 1 in 3 had said they started a relationship because their partner could provide for something: housing, transportation, food. And while those relationships may not have been, predatory relationships, unhealthy relationships, just the fact that they would have to turn to that as an option to provide their basic needs is exposing them to potential harm. And I think that's something for us to really be aware of. And you all know when you're in those classrooms with your students, you know who's really struggling, you know who needs support. And that's something to keep an eye on too, is how can we make sure we're continuing to provide holistic resources to young people so that they can succeed. And I know having, all of us have been there, it's not a message for us to all receive very well when you're young, from adults to have lived experience, right? We all know better when we're teens. But just trying to help them see how pathways may open or constrain based on who you're spending your time with, what you're investing in. Even if you're not feeling like you're getting through, know that you are, because a lot of the young people in the survey also indicated they are looking to adults for models on healthy relationships, models on how you manage money as a couple. And for those of you who are parents here, and I was so happy to see this myself, the top individual young people learn this from are their parents. So we have an incredible opportunity and a duty to have these conversations, and while young people may appear like we're not listening, you are, which is great. I was very relieved. I have a 10-year-old, so I'm hopeful that some of my messages are sticking. So it is, we don't want to discount any opportunity we have to find supportive measures for individuals and really open our arms and, not come at as a, criticism about relationships or saying, this is not a big deal, this is your first relationship, but really meeting them where they are and recognizing how significant this issue is at a time where they're very vulnerable and so many different pathways can be open or cut off.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. Did you want to talk to this?
I can, okay. And I'm going to just leave this up for a while for you to think about as we continue to have the conversation. Charisse and I really want to see what we can do to help educators and what we can do to strengthen our impact. So you don't have to answer this right now, but think about what you might need for your classrooms or your schools and what actions you may want to take, and we'll be following up.
Yeah. And then also, Sarah, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the employment issue. I know that we were focusing more on the education interference, but as you mentioned, a lot of teenagers do have jobs. You had a job when you were a teenager. How does the employment interference show up for teens?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research that shows that those early employment opportunities can really help someone get ahead in their career. They're more likely to be able to start more leadership positions early on. Having that income can allow them to support their family and create family stability, or they can be saving it for college. So even though some of those jobs don't seem like they're really impactful, at the end of the day, they really do build a lot of leadership for young people. And I don't know about all of you. I got no training whatsoever when I went to my first job on what it means to be an employee, let alone workplace protections and rights. So when we have young people coming into these different places and have very little perspective on what is appropriate in a workplace, what should be expected, what shouldn't be expected, it just makes it a little more challenging for them to be able to navigate when their partner is calling them nonstop or showing up at the workplace to either pick them up early or try to get them to leave the workplace. So there were certain elements of interference there, absolutely, but we also saw that some of them really pushed their partner to work so they can have access to those financial resources, or push them to not have a job at all so they could spend more time together. And again, some of these things don't necessarily seem on the face of it as completely horrible actions, right? You're at that age, you're probably not seeing what the long-term consequences can be. But it really can, it's undermining that independence for the sake of the relationship. So you can absolutely see how that can show up in the workplace, and I can guarantee you a lot of those supervisors of those young people are saying, well, you're just not fit, you can't be here, right? You immediately get fired, and you're not necessarily given the chance to have that support that you would need to understand what is appropriate and maybe get a sense of, perhaps you need some support with this relationship and direct them to resources. We also at Futures work with a lot of workplaces on trying to help them understand that the well-being and safety of their employees is part of their job, and recognizing and responding to gender-based violence and harassment, whether it's sexual assault or domestic violence, is really very critical. And we're hoping that employees can really think about young people in particular, not only just because of economic abuse, but we know a lot of the jobs young people have as their first jobs expose them to really high levels of sexual harassment. And of course, none of them are trained to recognize it. When you have such a massive power differential between an adult and a teenager, it just creates opportunity for exploitation, and they have no recourse. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for, if you have educational or employment partners that you work with, to think about how you can prepare them, or even educate young people about workplace rights so that they know what resources they have available to them.
Great, thank you so much for that, Sarah. So we do have time for some questions. If there are any in the room, there's a couple of mics available for anybody who wants to ask a question. We have some great things coming in around what lessons or actions folks will take back to their schools. Oh, someone says, can you come speak to a group of teens this summer? Speaking engagement offer, so that's good. And I like the one particularly about the peer-to-peer group, so that young people can have people they can talk to and relate to and feel comfortable sharing about these relationships. I think that's really great. When one is hidden by the QR code, that's really good. And having a roundtable discussion to have a real conversation about it. Oh. There you go. Oh.
Hi, I have a question for the youth on the panel. I'm curious to know what healing techniques you guys use to heal from abusive relationships, and how, like, recommendations for other youth who are experiencing those kind of experiences.
Well, after the relationship I mentioned earlier, it's actually kind of funny. I wrote a book. That was my way of healing. I've always been a writer, and I love writing. And I always knew I wanted to publish a book before I turned 18, but the novel I was working on just was not coming through. So after I got out that relationship, I started going towards poetry more. So I wrote a lot of poetry, and I wrote a book, and I published it at the end of my senior year. Thank you.
What is the name of the book, Kumani?
My first book is called Wilted Flowers. I have a second one that just came out last month called Cycling Through Love. So those are the two little babies I have.
Where can people find your books if they would be interested?
You can find it anywhere, honestly. Yes, it's on Amazon. If you look up Kumani Bay on Google, you'll find it that way. But yeah, as a serious answer, towards everyone who may not write a poetry book, I think going to other people it was so important. That was the first thing I did, before I wrote the book. I went to everyone in my life that I found out I neglected because I thought that them telling me the concerning signs they saw in my relationship was them just hating. So I was like, let me go back and tell everyone what was actually going on, because I have to, let them know you guys are right. So that was a really big thing that helps, going to everyone and just being like, this is what was going on, this is how I'm feeling, and I can't do this alone because now I don't have the person that I was relying on to get through life. So that was a really big thing. And even if you don't know who your support system is yet, trying to find it. So going to teachers, letting them know, hey, this is what's going on. I may fall back on some assignments because I'm crying every single time I try to do my math homework. Going to my parents and saying, yeah, so you were right, and this is everything that I've been hiding from you. Going to my sisters and my friends and letting them know, yeah, like, I wasn't okay, and I'm glad that you guys stuck around, because I don't know, it's a really difficult thing where people are in really harmful relationships, and a lot of friends will start distancing themselves. They'll start saying, you know what, you don't want to listen, I'm out, you deal with that yourself. And I mean, hey, it's fair, but it's really hard being the one in the relationship to see that your friends are leaving because of that relationship, and once you get out, you don't have any more friends. And sometimes they don't come back because they see your relationship and all the actions that you had in the relationship as a reflection of you. And now they think, regardless of the relationship, this is who you are. And I'm really, really appreciative of everyone in my life who stuck around and was there to wipe my tears and say, yeah, we know, it's okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was going to speak similarly. I did not write a poetry book, unfortunately. I did not reach that stage yet. But I was also going to mention that I also seeked guidance from the people in my life, because I feel like they've lived so many past lives, they've had so many experiences, so many stories to tell, and by kind of rejecting them and by embracing one relationship, I'm really pushing away the people that are most present in my life and most important to me. So definitely seeking guidance, healing by doing the things you love, really finding compassion and just finding strength in everything around you. Yeah.
Hi, you talked about control versus support. And while I know this is a lot of like romantic relationships, how do you have the discussion with parents that are trying their best, right? But as a former teacher and now an admin, I run into this a lot where there are these opportunities for students and parents are like, no, I don't want my kid to go. No, but my kid needs to help babysit. No, but my kid needs to work, right? So how do you have those conversations without putting the parent on the defensive because they're doing what they think is the best, but they're also limiting opportunities for their kids?
That's a great question.
The first thing that comes to my mind is knowing the impact. I feel like I think when you know what is going to happen, it makes you not want to do the thing. So I think teaching parents, yes, I understand where you're coming from and why you think this way, yet if this happens, this can happen. And that way you're still not controlling what they're doing with their own kid, but you're letting them know these are the effects that can come out of what you're doing. Therefore, you cannot say you don't know. So I think that's a big thing you can do, is learning the impacts for yourself and being able to communicate that with the parents. But then also, I don't know, it depends on the student's comfort levels, but bringing the student into the conversation and saying, hey, this is what they think about what you're saying. So if they don't like this, And I'm telling you what's going to happen if you keep forcing them to do it. Yeah, I don't know, like, I think you know you're the wrong one now.
Sarah or Liz, anything to add to that?
This is one I struggle with a lot as a parent myself, and really examining what is coercive controlling behavior versus trying to protect, right? And I think, and I should also mention, when I had a lot of conversations with young people to explore this issue, many of them said we also need to talk about how our parents are controlling what we do. And I said that's definitely another study for another day, and something that I know parents will not be thrilled that I'm saying some of what you're doing could be construed as economic abuse. But I think it's really, it can be very hard as a parent to watch your child do something when you know what the potential outcomes can be. But at the same time, part of our job is to create that safe and supportive environment so when they fall, they have someone there to catch them. And part of, growing up is really making those mistakes when you're in a safe environment, so you're not doing it as an adult by yourself, right? So that's kind of some guiding structure I'm currently on in my own parental journey. But I can also see the outcomes of having some of that controlling action and relationship. And it doesn't even have to be as serious as you are going to be this profession, right? But it could also be, making a lot of just the basic decisions in a young person's life, where when it comes to making decisions on their own, they can become paralyzed because they've never had that opportunity. And we don't want our children to go off as adults and not be able to make it on their own. We love getting the texts from them, asking for things and offering advice, but it's really about creating those pathways for independence rather than dependency. So sometimes we have to let them fall and make those mistakes, and that's actually what we need to be doing, and it's quite important. Hard to do, absolutely, but it's our job.
Thank you. I have another, and just to add, I think about cultural responsiveness and cultural humility, because if you're just trying to do a thing without learning, like Kumani said, about their family and those cultural aspects, then again, it becomes more power and control. My question is for the young people, and thinking about when you do have healthy support or healthy adults around, yet your time with social peers is so much different. What is something you can share with adults or the supportive adults in your life with that conflict? Because even you can have that and there's still social influences that are so much greater. What could you give us adults and parents to help continue to counter that or support that?
You stumped them.
I can spitball. Okay. All right, so I'm thinking specifically because I'm in college right now, that's like a really big thing because I'm growing into adulthood, but I'm still not an adult. And I'm in a situation where a lot of my peers are doing the exact same things I am, and so it's really, really easy to kind of lean on them for support because you think somehow they know better, even though we're doing the same thing. And then you'll hear your parents say something and you're like, well, that's not what my friend said, so I don't know. But I think a big thing to bring to my parents and adult figures is just kind of giving both sides and just being able to say, okay, this is where I am, this is where I'm thinking because of this, and then this is where you are, and this is how I feel about this. I think the biggest way to navigate this is just communication and knowing how to communicate what you want, because it can get kind of hard to navigate social influences and your authority influences when you don't actually know what you want. So being able to be given a space by adults to work together to say, this is what I think I want, what do you think about this? Because it's really important to know that every single thing in your life is influencing what you want. And being able to be open about, this is what I think and this is why, can really help the parents see, okay, so that may be because of this. And not telling them this is wrong, you're doing this because of your friends, but being able to say, I see this pattern happening, I see that this may be connected to each other, and just being able to have open communication, because that's really what teens want. We want to be able to talk and not feel like we're being lectured or talked at, and not feeling like we're, I don't know the word, arguing. I feel like a lot of adults will say that we're trying to be hostile and arguing and argumentative with adults for not listening to what they say, instead of it always just being open conversation.
Yeah, I won't lie. That question kind of stumped me in a bit, in a way. But I 100% agree with Kumani when she talks about communication, because I feel like, especially now that I'm also in college and I'm hundreds of miles away from my parents, more than ever I want to be open with them, and I really want to openly communicate with what I'm doing, maybe what is going around campus, how I'm feeling about my classes. Personally, for me, I had kind of a difficult transition into college because of how fast-paced it was, and also because I felt like I was constantly comparing myself to other students. And after really consulting my parents, talking to them, and realizing that they will always be there for me even though we are so far apart, even though we're like in the same state of California, it's just really important to talk to your parents, really understand that besides them, there are many people in your life that can really support you, such as, the educators in your life, your friends, even though, at times it can be a little shaky. It's so important to understand how important it is. It's important to understand what communication can do for you and your relationships.
And if I could just add, Liz, it's the communications piece, right? So this is why we wanted to have young people lead this effort, right? Those of us who are older, we don't really know how to communicate effectively with young people. We don't have their lived lives. Many of us probably did not grow up with the internet at our fingertips, right? We didn't grow up with all this different stuff going on in the world. It's a very different experience that, while we can try our best to relate to, it's not our own lived experience. And we thought it was just so important. And again, this group of young people, 2 of the 20 that are here, are just so incredibly inspiring and hopeful. And it's a matter of us to give them the tools and the support that they need and let them lead and explore. And that's what's been really so empowering for me as an adult to watch. Is this is their lived experience. They're going to have the solutions. We just need to open up the pathways for them to explore them and find it. And like with parents, they might stumble and might need some support to come back, but that's what we need to be doing, is allowing them to own what is part of their lives and trying not to tell them, well, this is how we should be talking to you. This is what you need to do, right? We really want to make sure that you all are, again, at the center of the work, because you're the ones that we want to see succeed at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Sarah. I think that's such an important model for all different kinds of work that involves young people, to have young people at the center of that work, right? Because I think that's going to improve effectiveness. It's going to make sure that they are also empowered, and then it'll have like a ripple effect of empowering them, and they can empower others. So it's just a really important model. So is there any more questions? We have time for maybe one more question. But if not, that's fine, because, we have one more.
I know the answer, but I want other people to hear it. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with your campaign theme, and specifically how it relates to the ripple effect of economic abuse?
Yes. So in the corner of the slideshow is our little logo, and it says create your own universe, and that is the theme of our campaign. And we came up with it because we wanted to show that teens should have the opportunity to create their own lives and create their own paths for their future. And through this awareness campaign, we are allowing them to know that you may or may not be. So, yeah, that's my answer.
I don't have much to add on, but yeah, that is our campaign. And
And you could visit the website to learn much
please do.
more. They're still very much in the early pieces of building out this campaign. Educators like you are one of the key audiences that they're looking at, also looking at parents who were shown to be key influencers, but also their peers, and really having those conversations. So on the website, you'll see a lot of information currently available for educators. We'll be populating it with much more information for teens and for parents. But this is an opportunity for us to have conversations and really start the conversation that hasn't been happening for so long. And we are learning so much about how to communicate with young people about this and how we can support. So please visit that website, sign up for more information, and we'll keep on seeing the amazing resources our young folks are rolling out to us.
Yes, that's so awesome, and thank you for explaining the campaign and exciting launch today. So it was perfect timing somehow, how that works. But also I wanted to thank all of you for coming today. I want to thank our amazing panelists, the phenomenal Kumani and Liz, in particular, the amazing Sarah. Also, just a couple of announcements from the Allstate Foundation. If you want to stop by and say hi tomorrow at 9 at the Networking Lounge, we have lunch vouchers for folks. You can have lunch on the Allstate Foundation. Tomorrow in the same room at 11:30, we'll be having a conversation about healthy masculinity with the Call to Men. That's going to be a great conversation. And the folks from Futures, and including Kumani and Liz and our other panelists, will be around tomorrow. We're having a meetup at 4 p.m. in room 406. So it'll be an opportunity for you to network more informally and chat with our panelists and learn more, and also members from the Allstate Foundation if you want to talk to us too. We'll be there just to share, ask questions, network, connect. So thank you all again so much for coming, and hopefully have a great time here at South by Southwest EDU.